So nice to see you again after June when we met first.
Yes, in Switzerland. Yes, lovely.
So thank you. So Dr. Ian, I'll just finish off the introduction first. It will also give you a perspective of what we are doing and also the audience about who you are exactly. So I'm
Yeah.
Shashi, a certified metabolic health coach from D Life, India's first and only award-winning low-carb platform. And it was founded in 2014 by Anup Singh, who is an IIT Premium Engineering Institute, and he's a silver medalist at that, and Icons of India awardee. So he also pioneered the low carb movement in India, and his groundbreaking 100 grams carb per day max protocol for Indians made low carb very easy for type 2 diabetes management, especially for the vegetarians, which otherwise is very difficult. And in 2020, he launched T-Life Diploma course, the only legally tenable course approved under the NSDC Partner Government of India in this segment with the world's largest 144 CPD Hrs. So Anup Singh and me, we both co-organized India's first historic look-up conference back in 2023, the second in 2024, and now the third one in 2025. So in this conference, I'm very happy to invite Dr. Ian Lake. I'll give a brief introduction of Dr. Lake. Dr. Ian Lake is a primary care physician in the UK who is keen to ensure that all his patients with type 1 diabetes and their clinical team knows how to optimize insulin from all the root of health. After 20 years of living with type 1 diabetes, he accidentally discovered dietary lifestyle, which had such a profound transformation in his diabetes control from the first day. He held his insulin dosage, reduced his hypo, and much improved the blood sugars. He has since done deep dive into type 1 diabetes. He's aware of insulin management can be maximized if there's an understanding of role of diet, physical activity, sleep, and circadian rhythm mindset and our lived environment. He feels healthy and alert, and that he has the confidence to resume sports in the great outdoors solo, and which he had to stop previously because of safety concerns around type 1 diabetes. In 2020, he organized 0500 project, the 100-mile run over 5 days with 0 calories, water only. It's unbelievable. One other person with type 1 diabetes was in the team of 8. It was designed to address clinical concerns about the ketogenic diet in type 1 diabetes, and it was such a success. There was no issue at all. So he is a published author in peer-reviewed journals and a public speaker in this topic at conferences worldwide. He also runs residential course on insulin optimization for people living with type 1 diabetes. So type 1 diabetes and ketogenic diet is a big wow. Welcome, Dr. Ian.
Thank you very much, and thanks for that lovely introduction. As it happens, I'm on day 6 of our residential retreat for people with type 1 to optimize their insulin. So it's an appropriate time to be speaking with you. Everyone's doing very well, so that's good.
So what, as a type 1 diabetes, what led you to explore and adopt this ketogenic diet, despite always the push for the usual diet which we have?
Yeah, so I'm a conventionally trained doctor, and when I developed diabetes 30 years ago, I believed in the conventional method. Why wouldn't I? But over 20 years of trying to do that, it proved very difficult for me to control my diabetes, and it was getting worse and worse as time went on. A year before I adopted a keto lifestyle, I'd accidentally run into the wonderful book Richard Bernstein's Diabetes Solution. And I read that from cover to cover in a weekend. So it was so compelling. Then I put it down and I thought there's far too much fat in that, because at the time we were recommended to have a low fat diet. So I pressed on. And then about a year later, I had a very tricky situation, a hypo, when I was on my own and ran out of glucose. So that was a touch and go event for me. I remember it well. And then I got my first letter to say I'm developing retinopathy. So for me, there was no choice but to try to, I had nothing to lose really at that point. So I remember eating my first omelette, and I got a completely flat glucose line, and the next meal, and the next meal, and the next meal. And then I obviously became a complete convert. And since then, I've been trying to convince my colleagues and subsequently all of my fellow type 1s that this is a good way to go. Hence why we're here on this retreat now.
And I think that Dr. Bernstein has such a far-reaching impact globally. Even we, as type 2 diabetics, we have also read his book right from the time we got diagnosed. So I recall reading it somewhere in December 2015, and I got diagnosed in September 2015, and October 2015, I joined D-Life. I met Anup Singh there, and then he encouraged us to read all these books. So
He's
I'm very curious to know at this stage, what were your diet like? Was it vegetarian side, high grain diet, grain? Because you just now mentioned that you ate omelette and saw a flat line. So I'm curious to know.
my diet now.
Earlier.
Earlier, it was a traditional 55% carbohydrate diet. Pretty well. There's something in the UK called DAFNE, which is dose adjustment for normal eating. And of course, normal eating is high carbohydrates. So that's what it is. So it was everything that most people eat. So there's meat, there's fish, there's obviously all of the what you call low carb foods, but equally there were pastries, rice, potatoes, bread, etc., porridge. Every morning I used to eat porridge. And every Monday morning, I used to say, right, this week I'm going to do better than last week. And I started off with the blood glucose about 6, had some porridge, probably put about 6 units of insulin, which is what I consider a very high dose now. And by lunchtime, I'd be about 12, 13. If you're in the States, it's multiplying by 18. So that's about 180, probably 220, something like that. So it didn't really work. And it was an omnivore type of diet. And I'm still on an omnivore diet, but obviously tending to all of the keto foods.
So when we say, see, we always know that, okay, low carb for type 1, type 2 and all, but you specifically mentioned ketogenic diet. Now, we all know about diabetic ketoacidosis, especially in type 1. So can you dwell upon that ketogenic diet, diabetic ketoacidosis? Did you not have fear of going into DKA? There is a common perception. So that's why I'm asking a very simple question.
Yes, that's a very interesting point, really, because I did a survey of 150 people from my website who are already converts to keto. So clearly there'll be a bias in the answers to that. But what when I looked at the reasons why healthcare professionals were against keto diets, 1 in 8 said it leads to diabetic ketoacidosis. Well, all of the people on the course I'm running today, all of these people, non-specialist, non-medical backgrounds, can tell you why diabetic ketoacidosis isn't a risk when you're in nutritional ketosis. And you know, and everyone probably who watches this recording will know that. But for the people that keep saying, well, there's a risk of DKA, I just simply ask them, well, could you enlighten me on why that might be the case? And so far, I haven't had a good answer to that. So I think that everything is safe, and definitely the metabolism and the biochemistry and the feedback loops in the body suggest this is completely safe. There's a person called Suzanne Schneider who did a 2-year study on 30 people with type 1 who are keto, and none of those had a DKA event, and they were all on keto diets. And there's only 1 case of hypoglycemia in the whole of that 2-year period amongst 3 people. So that would suggest it's very, very safe. The other thing I should say, however, is that when we have type 1 diabetes, we are still at risk of DKA, but not because of the diet. The diet has no impact on our DKA risk, but if we are not taking our insulin for whatever reason, if we don't have access to it, like in some countries where people can't get hold of it, if you have a body problem where you want to lose weight, or if you're severely ill, you need to be aware that you need to be on it and adjust your insulin appropriately to prevent DKA. But it is not caused by the nutrition.
So what are the benefits you have seen with adopting a ketogenic diet?
There are multiple benefits to this. Obviously, you get the obvious, the normalization of blood sugar on day 1. So when you say how long does it take? Well, to become fully keto adapted, it probably takes about 3 weeks. But from day 1, you start to get good results. So normalization of blood glucose. I halved my insulin dose overnight. My HbA1c came down into the non-diabetic and often the normal range for people who don't have any pre-diabetes either. And I got fewer, it was more of a smooth trace of blood glucose, so fewer hypos, but also things like freedoms to be confident when you're at meetings or doing sport or traveling. I never always check. In fact, I only checked my blood sugar, my blood glucose about 5 minutes. I thought, oh my goodness, I haven't checked my blood glucose. But I knew it would be okay. and it's 5, and that's 90 in milligrams per deciliter. And I know that I'll be okay for the whole of this talk, and I won't be eating till lunchtime. So it gives you freedoms to eat when you like. Other things that are not mostly talked about, your brain fog disappears. You become really clear in your thinking, and you're wired up, not in a negative way, but in a positive way. And that is a fantastic benefit. You don't realize you're brain fogged until you're not. So I thought I was okay, but now I'm on a keto diet. I feel so much more alert and vital. Vision improves, the fogginess of vision improves. When I was on a high carb diet, I often got joint pains or injuries when I was running or something like that. I've had 2 calf injuries in 10 years, and that's thankfully all I've had. So improvement in joint pains. Getting up at night to pass urine, I don't do that anymore. I used to be up a couple of times a night, once a night, something like that. Now that's disappeared completely, which improves my sleep, which is, of course, one of the roots of health. More energy in general, and improved dental health. So there are lots of benefits that aren't the obvious, just the standard HbA1c and reduced insulin, but many, many benefits for type 1s. And you get them very early on, in the first 6 to 8 weeks, they come upon you.
So in the standard approach of eat anything and load yourself with insulin. So what are the commonly seen complications which you think can be avoided by adopting a low carb diet or ketogenic?
Well, obviously the obvious complications that we all know on the day we're diagnosed and the clinic tells us, we're at risk of cardiovascular disease, which of course includes heart disease and strokes, and peripheral vascular disease, so effect on the nerves, so we often get neuropathy, and the effect on the eyes and the kidneys. And there's a lot of morbidity in type 1 diabetes, and we all fear that, and it causes a lot of mental health or stress problems for us. But there are the other downstream effects. I don't think, you see, we all say, oh, that's caused by high glucose levels, and we use HbA1c as a marker of the potential to get complications, which is why we're always encouraged to reduce our HbA1c and get our sugar right. But what I think is not yet realized is that it is also the insulin which is causing us a problem. So the general conception is, oh, get your sugar levels right, and it doesn't matter how much, you can use as much insulin you want. Insulin's a free ride, shoot it all up, and don't worry about how much you need. Well, we are starting to understand now that Alzheimer's disease, progression of cancer, certainly, neurological diseases such as bipolar disease and migraine, they all have hyperinsulinemia, high insulin levels, as part of the causation of those conditions. So not only are us type 1s at risk of that, but because we inject our insulin into the skin and not where it should be injected, we are automatically in a high insulin state. So to add carbohydrates, which are biggest requirement, which is the biggest user of insulin, if you like, or we need more insulin for carbs, puts us at risk of all of those conditions as well. There's a fantastic podcast called Bipolar Cast with a guy who had, Matt Bazuki, he had bipolar disease, 5 times the risk of suicide with bipolar disease when you're on the downtime. And within months, having adopted a keto diet, accidentally found it, he was much more able to function and in both the up times and the down times. Well, think about that. If you have someone with bipolar disease who's now convinced that a keto diet is good for them, and they then develop type 1 diabetes, that presents some people with a very difficult clinical challenge. And is it better, therefore, to keep your HbA1c good and take a high carb diet to prevent ketones appearing in your blood, or is it better to reduce your risk of suicide 5-fold by adopting a specialist diet? So there are lots of benefits of lowering your insulin levels, and that's what we teach on this course. It's called insulin optimization for all roots of health, not just diet, but physical activity, circadian rhythms, mental health, and our environment that we live in.
How real is this double diabetes, even in type 1? Insulin.
It's very common. Most people with type 1 diabetes put on weight as they go on, and all of the complications of type 2 diabetes are the same ones that we experience. And people do tend to need more insulin as time goes on. Not everyone, but those that put on weight. So within the type 1 profile, which is an autoimmune disease, there will be a percentage of those who have more of a tendency to have type 2 anyway. So, and they will be the ones that will progress to type 2 diabetes. So double diabetes, as we call it, is not uncommon at all in type 1.
So that's a real risk. That means already someone is insulin deficient, they have to take insulin, and
Yeah.
also excess insulin leads to insulin resistance, which may not have heard much in the past, but it's becomes a very real issue in present times. So I think type 1 diabetes, if they are on the usual high carb and high insulin diet, so not only they take a lot of boluses of insulin, but also face a lot of complication and also very severe glycemic variability. I think that glycemic variability itself will lead to a lot of complication probably. So
100%.
how about the pushback? Have you received pushback from fraternity in general?
Yes, I mean, 10 years ago, I discovered all of this and became very evangelical about it. And I thought, oh, I've only got to tell my colleagues about it, and they'll say, oh, that's really good. Let's do it. But that, unfortunately, as most of us watching this will know, that there's a huge amount of pushback from our colleagues. In the early days, there were a lot of negative comments. I can produce a lot of clinical records from specialists because I'm a generalist, and when our patients come back from the specialist diabetology clinics, they always come back with a letter. And my name was often mentioned in very negative terms about it's an unsafe diet. So, but that has now disappeared. We're just now ignored by the mainstream media, and we're ignored by, in this country anyway, by the charities and the main information sources for people with type 1. For example, and I hope we can talk about this later, we just produced a guideline or a position statement on low carb in type 1. And there are only 2 specialist diabetes organizations that have actually published that. The mainstream organizations have completely ignored it. So that's where we are right now. So we're not getting any pushback anymore. We're just getting being ignored.
Now, how long have you been in ketogenic diet?
10 years.
10 years. 10 years is massive.
It's a long time, and I'm still thriving. I'm still well, and I feel much better now than I did 10 years ago.
I think now I want to discuss something very, very, people will not believe this. Many may not know this. You cycled 1,000 miles from UK to St. Moritz to attend the Keto Live conference while maintaining 30-gram ketogenic diet. What inspired you to do this, and what did you want to prove?
Well, I was in search of something to do. After the 0-5-100, the 100-mile run, I had a couple of years where I wasn't doing a great deal of challenge. I did a run from London to Birmingham along the canal network in this country, but that was just a private, I just did that as a private little holiday, if you like. And then I got a chance to go to Switzerland from the UK, and I normally sort of make my own way down there. But I thought, well, I've got a little bit of time on my hands right now. I'll cycle it, because I was talking about physical activity in type 1 diabetes. So what better way to lead from the front than actually go there on a cycle? That inspired me. And the other thing I wanted to do, because I'll never convince my colleagues at the moment that the people at the top end aren't really too interested in change right now. But I think I can inspire my fellow type 1s, because they're the ones that I really care about. And I thought, well, I'll measure everything. So I wore a continuous keto meter, continuous glucose meter. I recorded all of my diet in detail, recorded the distance, my heart rate. And I'm going to publish that at some point, and I'm hoping to publish that in book form, like a textbook of diabetes, really.
So how exactly you did it? What adaptations you did? How did you manage? Did you face any difficulty during the journey? And what did you take really? I mean, in the sense, you took electrolytes, you took water. How is it?
Well, I didn't do much at all, to be honest. I did some training runs, some training rides, just to make sure I could do the distance, because I'm not particularly a cyclist. I'd call myself a commuter cyclist or a touring cyclist type of person, an occasional cyclist. So my preparation was just making sure I was physically fit enough, and then just carry on doing what I'm doing. So I didn't take electrolytes. I just took water, and I ate a keto diet. I decided I wouldn't take supplies with me, so I had to buy all my food en route for space purposes on a bike. But there's no preparation required, you see. This is the wonderful thing. You just set off and go. The only thing I had to do was adjust my insulin volumes downwards, because with my experience of fasting before, and this wasn't a fasted ride, but I knew I'd become more insulin sensitive. So for the first couple of days, I was reducing my insulin. I didn't quite get that right in the first 2 days and needed a bit of glucose rescue. But for the rest of the time, I had good control throughout. And this was on pens, basal bolus, and not pumps. So after that, it was absolutely fine. There were no injuries at all. I had a couple of punctures. But the thing I think we need to know is really that I was on a 17-year-old cycle. I wasn't doing this on a brand new cycle. I was fully laden with kit, but I think even though my bike was 17 years old, I was actually not as old as the bike was. I think my keto diet has kept me much fitter than I would otherwise have been if I'd have stayed on the conventional diet.
So what tips can you give to type 1 diabetics who wants to be athlete? Is there any fear? Is there something they need to do? How did you really manage to be a good athlete in spite of having insulin?
It's much easier to be to do physical activity as a type 1 diabetes when you're managing it with minimal insulin. All of the current algorithms for managing type 1 diabetes in sport are about either reducing your insulin or increasing your carbohydrate intake. That gives you the idea, doesn't it, that people with type 1 are using too much insulin. So you have to manage your insulin the night before, and then you have to manage it on the day, and then you have to take carbohydrates. And if you're doing long distances, you have to be chewing carbohydrates 60 grams an hour, after 2 hours, which if anybody eats sugary foods when they're exercising, they'll know it makes you quite nauseous. So there is not much required really with a keto diet. You just get on with it. I tried to fast with exercise all the time, but the logistics of this was that I had to have breakfast and 2 meals throughout the day because I had to adapt my eating regime to sort out the amount of exercise I was doing and the type of insulin I was using. But that was fine preparation. After a couple of days, it was all straightforward for me. So there's no preparation required. An interesting thing was on the very last day, I had a 5-hour cycle ride. I had a minimal breakfast, 2 slices of cheese and a little bit of red meat and a cup of coffee. 5 hours later, I'd gone over a Swiss mountain pass, which is 2.5. Freedom you get. I knew it would be okay, and when I checked it, it was 4.2, which was perfect. It was, multiply by 18, so 70 odd. So that was perfect. So it was perfect throughout the whole journey, and I knew it would be, which I think is remarkable.
So let us talk about this SMHP position paper. Who were who are all the co-authors, and what exactly is it? That statement on position statement on type 1.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I've got an unstable signal here right now.
The SMHP position statement. You can hear me now? There is some signal issue.
Got you now. I've got you now, yeah.
Can we talk about the SMHP position statement?
Yes. The SMH, Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, there are 14 people who are co-authors of this statement, which is about therapeutic carbohydrate restriction in type 1 diabetes. Now, what we looked at was all of the evidence. There are 56 references to ketogenic or very low carbohydrate diets in this paper. So for those that say there is no evidence, just pop onto our paper and you'll find 56 references, which is quite a lot, really, isn't it? And what it showed really was that what we called for, all of the stuff I've been telling you is in that paper about reducing your carbohydrates, reduces your insulin requirement, which improves your HbA1c, which smooths out your blood glucose, which is likely to reduce complications. But what we're calling for is open access for clinical support for therapeutic carbohydrate reduction for individuals with type 1 diabetes. The important thing is across all age groups. Yes, children can do it as well. and it is safe for children to do it. And the second really is that we think it's imperative that people with type 1, along with their families, receive comprehensive information, education, and support from the entire health team regarding the option of therapeutic carbohydrate restriction interventions. So we're saying this should be an option well delivered by everybody who's trained to identify or identifies diabetologists themselves. For all those people that are diabetologists, they should be well trained in this method because it is a valid option for some people if that's what they want to choose. But right now, a lot of people aren't getting that information. And the commonest, I mean, on this course we're running today, the commonest thing was, why wasn't I told this earlier? So we need to start telling people earlier. I think that's the common message we're getting.
That provides a very valuable insight and a reference for everyone now. I think that can be cited and used well. So Anup, if you want to come in, you can come now. Anup also wants to ask some questions. So Anup is on 14 year pill-free type 2 diabetes life. So he has, and he's our master of insulin. So,
oh, fantastic.
So he has a fantastic knowledge on insulin. So he's very curious to ask you a lot of questions.
Hi, Anu.
Yeah, welcome, Dr. Ian. Basically, I'll have two questions. One is related to your 1,000-mile cycling. Now, as we know, tackling type 1 diabetes is a different beast as compared to type 2. And since you were cycling, my question is, did you titrate your insulin dose down, or did you take
Yes.
your carb load up? And if you titrated it down, how much was the difference between regular bolus dosing and while during cycling?
Yeah, thank you. So I always find that if I'm doing any prolonged exercise, I will titrate my insulin down. Not by much, but on this event, because I was cycling for 6 hours a day for 18 days, I managed to go from my basal went down from 18 units a day to 12 units a day, and my rapid insulin didn't really alter. I was only using occasional units here and there. But in the first few days, I was surprised how quickly I became more insulin sensitive, because I thought I was quite fit and anyway, but I became much more insulin sensitive. I never dial my carbs up unless I'm hypo. Never dial my carbs up, always dial my insulin down. I mean, insulin optimization is about what I say is as much insulin as necessary, but as little as possible. So I think we should be concentrating in diabetes on understanding and optimizing insulin and not worrying too much about glucose levels, because they will follow good insulin levels.
Yeah, and the second one is basically not a question. We've been dealing with diabetics at community level when we started. Now, as type 1 juvenile diabetics, we had 3. The youngest one was 4.5 years old, and she hit A1C of 4.5 before the parents realized that they have gotten hold of everything, so they moved on. The second case was daughter of a MD doctor. Now the doctor had switched to lchf because we do low carb high fat. Given the Indian diet, it's not so compatible with Western keto, where you have to restrict to 30 grams. So that girl started on low carb when she was, I think, 11 years old. 6 years down the line, consistently she's been maintaining 5.0, 5.1. And third one was again 6 years old, and the mom is now running I think a group for type 1 diabetic parents. So this is the achievement that we have had as far as handling type 1 is concerned, but primarily we are handling type 2.
And I think everyone has taken benefit of Dr. B's book. Even they.
Yes.
Yes.
So my other question is, why still there's a reluctance from the authorities, especially like ADA? ADA still has a far-reaching impact globally, even in India. Do you think low carb will become mainstream even for type 1 diabetes? So, but we know that in between that somewhere in 2020, Diabetes Canada did approve. Diabetes Canada did approve low carb LCD or very low CHO for type 1. How about UK? How about ADA?
Well, the new guidelines do accommodate people's wishes, and they do say there is no optimum carbohydrate level below which you should go. So that is a start, really. However, the mainstream is all about low fat, healthy whole grains, which of course are not particularly healthy for me. And I think the guidelines set in the 70s and 80s were based on evidence to prevent white men having a second heart attack. That was the whole, because at the time, American men were having a lot of heart attacks, and the President Eisenhower kicked all of this off by having a heart attack. Then a guy called Russell Keyes, who was a very ambitious epidemiologist, came up with some evidence, which has subsequently been shown to be not as good as it should have been. They adopted a high carbohydrate, low fat model for a guideline for food. Britain subsequently adopted that with our something called Eat Well Guide. America had the food pyramid. I'm sure you have your own equivalent in India. But I don't know quite what happened here, because type 1s, we have to accept we have a higher incidence of heart disease than people who don't have type 1. So fair enough, you could say, well, okay, well, we've got a diet here for reducing heart disease. Well, let's just bolt type 1s on, because we get bolted onto anything, and I don't know who lost their mind at this point, because, on that committee, there are a lot of people who weren't medically trained. There are a lot of food industry people trying to work out the optimum diet. But suddenly people said, or didn't say, but type 1s have a pancreas, pancreatic function. So does that make them require a special diet? And that was missed. So even though the carbohydrate volume in the diet was increased to 50 to 55% or even more, what they missed was that type 1s are going to have to handle this extra carbohydrate load, because we have two people on our course, Andy and Judith, who both have had diabetes for over 40 years, and the guidelines at that stage, when the insulins weren't so tidied up and clean, were low carbohydrate diets. They were taught to manage their diabetes with the low carbohydrate method. And subsequently, they've never gone high carbohydrate, because they were doing well on low carb. And when they were persuaded to eat what you like and shoot up as much as it takes, they decided they didn't want to do that. So they're now 40, nearly 50 years in one case down the line with no complications. And I think that is partly it's the type of autoimmune disease they have. It's probably not as aggressive as other people, but partly because they have been lowish carb for the whole of their lives.
So,
and the other thing I should say, there is no evidence, there's never been any trials done to suggest that a low-fat diet is actually good for us as type 1 diabetics. There's been no studies done on type 1s whatsoever. There have been studies done on keto diets in type 1, and they're shown to be very favourable indeed. So when people tell me there's no evidence, it just means there's no evidence if you're a sugar doctor. But if you're trained in metabolism, as we should be as doctors, in the broad issue of metabolism, and then, of course, there is evidence.
So you yourself are an example of a type 1 diabetic on a low carb or ketogenic diet. What other activities you do to propagate this concern, this safety, and removing the concern? Now, what is this residential course you're doing? What is it about? Who all are there? Are there doctors, or are there type 1 diabetics?
Yeah, so we run this. I'm the only doctor on the course. We're running it as with strict sort of medical supervision, which is myself. I stay here 24 hours a day for the full 6 days of the course. And it's a residential course where we have our meals prepared, and our meals tell the people who are participating, our students, how many carbs and how much protein there is in the diet, which unfortunately for these people is a novel concept. Protein should be counted as part of a healthy diabetic type 1 protocol. And then we spend a day talking about each route of health. So I'll have a day on diet, a day on physical activity, a day on mental health, a day on sleep and circadian rhythms, and a day on our lived environment. It's not always a single day, but they're the focuses, because we know that each one of those aspects of our daily lives impact or are impacted by insulin. And what we're learning to do is how to understand that our blood glucose goes up, not just because of our glucose, sugar in the diet or carbs, but it goes up for multiple reasons. And every single type 1 knows that you can do exactly the same thing 2 days in a row and get completely different results. And these people are now understand what that's all about. We understand that we should be getting outside first thing in the morning to reset our body clock, for example. We understand that meditation, breathing exercises are good for those people who have a big adrenaline response. We understand about diet. So what we do, I have a team of people who all have type 1 diabetes, and they're all expert on one aspect of those pillars of health. So we have someone who is an expert on food preparation and diet. We have someone who's an expert on how it impacts our mental health, etc., etc. And each day we have someone with type 1 diabetes who's living the keto lifestyle, often for a long time, talking to fellow type 1s about how they do it, and I provide the medical cover for that. So by the end, actually, our students here, when they graduate, they'll be supported for a whole year on WhatsApp, and I'll be seeing them twice on Zoom within that time. And we're collecting a huge amount of data so that we can make the clinical case for low carb. We've got 8 people gone through the first year, and all but one of those have got into the non-diabetic range, for example. Most of them have reduced their insulin a lot. So that's what we do here. And by the end of it, our students go out with enough knowledge to be able to stand their ground when they come up against one of those doctors who's failed to keep up to date, really. And unfortunately, in my country, 50% of clinicians advise against the keto diet on grounds of clinical safety. And I think we've got this split now, but 50% do. So it shouldn't be the case that you turn up to your clinic and it's literally the toss of a coin who you get. So we are educating our type 1s and they're very keen now to spread the word, to be able to understand that if they get advice that isn't up to date, they can handle that and they don't need to worry about taking that advice because it's out of date, and they know it's out of date. So we're trying to bring the standard up so those doctors that can support it are encouraged to support it. And we bring the general standard up so our doctors are trained broadly in metabolism and not just talking about sugar.
Yeah, if I may ask one question, follow-up question. You said that there's a 50-50 split.
Yeah.
There's a 50-50 split with respect to acceptance of keto for type 1.
Yes.
Now, the follow-up question is, have you seen any, difference in the mindset of the patient where your options are getting more, patients in your clinic than the other ones?
Oh, 100%. Unfortunately, they get quite cross. I say, well, why wasn't I told about this earlier? But the point is that they now have that. You see, people with type 1, this year is not a leap year. So you could say, oh, we get a day less to actually manage our diabetes, but we're managing it. I'm managing it right now. Every type 1 on this course is managing it right now. And I really do think that it should be a collaboration. Type 1 should be trained up. It's not difficult, to be experts in their condition. They should have access to the best information and the best papers and the best people to support them. It should be a collaboration. So we go to our doctors and say, hey, I'm having trouble with this, even though I'm on keto, squeaky clean and all that. And the doctor will have seen far more people with type 1 than I ever will as a type 1. Many of the people here have never met a type 1 before, and it's quite an emotional experience for them. But to get no support is quite deflating when you're told, oh, well, that's just a fad diet, or oh, you shouldn't be doing that because you'll get DKA. But now they know they don't need to worry. But the trick is for them they still need to see their specialist. But I dream of the day when we teach our healthcare professionals how it all works. So when someone with type 1 diabetes sees their specialist and says, I'm on keto, and they're having problems with it, the specialist will be able to say, yeah, well, I've seen 20 people that did this. Why don't you try that? And then it becomes a very fruitful collaboration. Everybody's happy. This antagonism is not helpful in my job. None of us set out to train to be antagonistic, but we end up in an antagonistic situation because our formal training doesn't accommodate low-carb diets right now. But we're hoping the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners paper will add to that, and people will start to use those 56 references to learn more. And we've got training ready to go if people want it.
Very interesting. So you're fortunate to have a lot of doctors like you in UK. We have Dr. David Unwin, Dr.
Yes,
Khan.
absolutely.
We had both of them in the earlier 2 sessions and you here. So what would be your message to Indian diabetologists, endocrinologists on this particular low carb or keto for type 1? If there's a message you want to tell.
Well, all I can say is that it is a valid option, and it's a very successful, and it's a superior option to the options we're currently giving. So who wouldn't want to offer superior options to their patients? There's a huge amount of pressure on doctors to conform. We all know that if we're clinicians of any sort, there's a huge amount of pressure to us. And people who are outliers often get severely bullied or ostracized from their peer group. So I do understand there's severe pressure to conform, but if you feel you can't conform, don't not inform people. So I often used to say in the early days, now I'm much more brazen about it, but well, this isn't part of our guidelines, but perhaps you should look at Richard Bernstein because it might offer you something. And if you like what he says, come back to me and I'll try to help you with it. And that's a way of getting started, and you can still fly under the radar. But hopefully there will be people who can just, and say, no, this is right. This is the results we're getting. There is good evidence for there's no evidence in type 1 for what we're meant to be doing. There's no evidence dietary studies done at all. So at least we should be going, if we're going with the evidence, we should go with the evidence for type 1s and keto diets.
Yeah. So I think we have come to the close. The next guest, Samir, is also here. So you are type 1, but you are a primary care physician, of course, and you have dealt with a lot of Indian patients there, I'm sure, in UK.
Yes.
And you know the situation in India. So what is your in India, the issue of type 2 diabetes is huge.
Yes.
The whole metabolic spectrum. What would be your message to India?
Oh, that's far too big a message for me. Who am I? I don't have a message for India other than that. Look out, I'm coming for you, because I'm coming to India in October when my son gets married to a lovely girl from Chennai. So I'll be coming down to Chennai in October. But it's really, if people are curious, follow your curiosity, and you might find it saves your life. And that's what happened to me personally. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, before we wind off, one question. The reluctance, is it, when the other doctors in the community, they are not liking or, saying low carb or keto is not meant for type 1 diabetics, is it reluctance to accept it? Or is it the, I would say ego to say, sorry, we were wrong? Or is it the pharma that is, dictating their decision?
I think it's yes, that's a great question. I think it's a combination. And I think it's a reluctance to want to step outside of safety. I think there's a lot of that. And I think also the resources we have as doctors for our training, if you go on a diabetes course, there's nothing mentioned about these sort of diets. Who just wants to get your speciality topped up. You can top it up, but you'll never hear of keto diets. So it's trying to say, well, if you do hear about these things, don't just, like say, oh, don't go with those people because they're dangerous. Just follow your curiosity, look it up, and you'll get so much clinical reward from it. David Unwin, you mentioned, a type 2 specialist who was in Lancashire, in the north of the UK. He almost gave up 10 years ago because he was just exhausted by the sheer workload. And then he discovered through a patient doing it, not him, he didn't discover it, a patient told him they'd lost weight and their diabetes improved. And then it sparked his curiosity again. And now here he is traveling around the world full of enthusiasm and rejuvenated as a doctor and seeing great results. Well, who wouldn't want to do that?
Thank you. Dr. Ian, thank you very much for such an inspirational journey so far, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of good work to do in coming times. So we'll see you again, and we look forward for any sort of collaboration in coming times. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting